Wade initially started working for the organization around February of 2019, and he worked with them for about 8 months until his arrest. Initially, he was brought in as a security detail. Because of his size, people are naturally intimidated by him, but didn't ask many questions about the job because he needed one and they were offering. He moved to the Florida Keys to work at a resort, and he lived on a 3-story yacht that was part of the resort. Everything initially started out okay, but about 2 days after he moved to the resort, that's when the main boss, Eric James Brown, asked Wade to be part of his first meeting, as another gentleman would be coming in and he needed to talk business. At this meeting is where Wade truly understood his role and why he was asked to be part of the business, again, to be security and intimidating due to his size. And he understood that the business had to deal with guns and drug trafficking. Wade made a comment that the gentleman at the meeting stated that they would make sure there was enough ice in the ice machines. Ultimately, ice is referring to meth. Wade then started to learn about the chain of command. Tommy Williams was second in command and the main drug runner. Wade then met Josh Mateo Luckish through Eric at the resort at a party they were hosting. Over time, Wade ended up becoming the second in command, and this upset Tommy because ultimately it kicked him out of his position. Wade continued to learn more about the organization as he got closer with Eric. He learned that a majority of the drugs were from Costa Rica because Eric lived there for 1 to 2 years in a penthouse. He also learned that there was a private airport nearby in Marathon, Florida, only about 15 minutes away from the resort. They also had multiple cigarette boats at the resort, the yacht Wade lived on, and later on, Eric purchased a 2-person plane that could take off from the water. They utilized these forms of transportation to get the guns and drugs transported from Costa Rica, Jamaica, islands and Bahamas, even more places, back to Florida. And if you see it, it's only going to be a couple-hour boat ride from the Florida Keys to Costa Rica. The organization controlled the entire Keys. All of the drugs and guns coming in and out, had power and control over many people who lived in what they call the trailers in the Keys, and they continued to expand through Florida and other states. Wade realized that Eric started bringing in girls from all over who were on their payroll. Started with strippers from Miami and the Keys, and then he started seeing women being transported in from Brazil, Australia, Costa Rica, Aruba, and other exotic countries. Wade started to put the pieces together to realize that they were dealing in human trafficking as well. Before he was officially introduced to the human trafficking side, he was required to meet Eric's mother, Sandra Stillwell Youngquist, who is truly the main boss of the organization. She came down to the resort in Conquy and interviewed Wade to make sure he was legitimate and was ready to be fully involved in their business. When he realized they were involved in human trafficking, Wade became less interested in being in the organization. When he realized they were involved in human trafficking, Wade became less interested in being in the organization. He said he could deal with the drugs and guns, but he didn't like the human trafficking portion of it. Eric then told Wade he needed him to go to Fort Myers to look after the girls in the spa there as security. Tommy came with him to Fort Myers, and Wade stayed at Josh Mateo's condo at the time in the area. Eric told Wade to not get involved with any of the girls at the spa, including Mila, because Mila and Tommy used to date. All of the girls at the spa are licensed, so it looks legit, but it's ultimately covering up the illegal operations. Wade started getting into the motions of the business and operations and was still mainly used as security for the girls. Wade even mentioned that they would make home or hotel visits, and he would go with the girls to drive them to make sure they would be okay. They would even bring massage tables and items, so it kept up the idea that the business was legitimate. While he was in Fort Myers, all of the guns and drugs were kept at Josh Mateo's warehouse that he used for his graphic design company, Mateo Graphics. Josh had a Cuban friend who kept his large trucks on his property. They would utilize those trucks to load the guns and drugs on and then cover it with debris to make it not look quite as sketchy. The organization had some dirty cops in the Cape Coral Police Department, which is the same police department that assisted in the first attempted arrest of Wade and accused him of the murders and were also part of his investigation and trial. Shortly after he arrived in Fort Myers, Wade started dating Mila. A few months later, they started talking about leaving the organization and moving to Hawaii. Now, they chose Hawaii because Mila previously dated a professional surfer there, lived in Hawaii, and was a prostitute there. Eric, Tommy, and Josh caught wind that they were planning to leave and take the rest of the girls with them. This means the spa in Fort Myers would be shut down, which affects their operations. Now, 2 days before the murders, Mila and Wade were at the spa late at night. They heard a knocking on the glass window, and Tommy was standing there with a man named Chris Brown, who was a very big bouncer and security guy for the organization. Tommy tried to get Wade to go outside and talk with him, and Wade said he would only speak to Tommy if Chris went back to the car. Once Chris went back to the car, Wade went outside, and that's when Tommy told him that they were aware of what he was up to and threatened that if he tried to leave, they would kill him. Tommy ended up leaving shortly after that. That next day, Wade went to the Buddha with Mila, where they met a doctor from Georgia who was interested in finding a girl to have sex with. Wade offered Mila up and said the doctor paid to sleep with her. Mila then went home with the doctor and did not go to a friend's house, as she said. Wade had Mila's car because she went home with the doctor. He didn't ultimately steal the car. Wade met Christine that evening, and they went to Jason Shepard's house after they left the Buddha, which they had just met Jason that night. Mila's Hellcat ran out of gas, and ultimately it stayed parked at Jason's house while Wade and Christine Ubered back to her place. Wade stayed at Christine's place until about 5 a.m., maybe a little bit later. He said it was around the time the sun was rising in October. He then left because he had to go to Josh's warehouse to get drugs to do a run. He used Christine's car to go to the warehouse because, again, the Hellcat was still at Jason's house without gas. When he arrived at the warehouse, Wade was met by Josh and another man he did not know. They said they needed to talk to him and told him to sit down. They then told Wade that they knew he wanted to leave the organization, but that wasn't going to be an option. Josh told Wade at that time that they were murdering both Christine and Diane, and that he would be expected to take the blame for it. They told Wade exactly how both murders would be done. In this way, Wade wouldn't be able to leave and would be in prison instead. They threatened him. It wasn't at gunpoint, but Wade knew guns were easily accessible since they were at the warehouse, that if he did not take the blame, they would harm his loved ones. They then forced Wade to make phone calls utilizing a device that would reroute through the victims' phones. That's why there's evidence that Wade used their phones to call his biological father and Mila. Wade first called his biological dad and purposely called him over his adopted parents because he didn't want to involve them. He told him he did something bad that he cannot take back. He was very vague with his initial conversation with his dad. He then called Mila, again, still utilizing that device which rerouted the call through the victim's phones, to tell her the same thing. Once the calls were done, Josh told Wade that he was going to call the police to have them come and arrest him. The first responding officer was Sergeant Angela Fleming, who was a longtime friend of Mila's. Angela Fleming is also related to Miguel Fleming, who was one of the detectives on Wade's case for the Cape Coral Police Department and was in the Navy with Mila. Josh called the cops and then left. While Wade was waiting for the cops to arrive so that he could take the fall, he had a change of heart. Wade got an opportunity to escape through the back door of the warehouse. He ran out the door and hid in the bushes and trees behind the warehouse for a while. Once the cops left, Wade found a house across the street that seemed abandoned that he was able to break in through the back window. He said he stayed in that house for a few hours, mid-afternoon to later that night, while he figured out his next steps. He needed a place to be safe and think about what he could do. Later that night, he called his biological dad, and he told him he did something bad and needed help. He then gave him more information about the murders because Wade was ready to go to jail and realized that this was his only option to keep his loved ones safe. His biological dad said he would send him an Uber, but instead called the cops, which Wade knew he would. The marshals came shortly after to arrest Wade, and he was taken to jail. 2 days after being in jail, Wade completed a video visitation with his biological dad, where he told his dad additional information, including where Diane's body was, so that it could be taken back to her family. Wade was forced into confessing, as he was terrified that his loved ones would be hurt. He knew if he told his biological dad that it would get back to Eric and the entire organization, showing that he upheld his side of the deal. 4 days after being in jail, Wade then confessed to the detectives for the murder, still concerned about his family's safety, and was hoping that this would get into the news, so again, Eric and the organization would see that he upheld his side of the deal. After 8 days in jail, it had still not broken on the news. Wade then took measures into his own hands and called Mila because he knew she would be working with the reporters. He confesses to the murders because he knew Mila would tell the reporters and it would get attention from media. Again, this would draw attention so that Wade could ensure that it got back to Eric and the organization, that he was confessing, upholding his end of the deal so that his loved ones would be kept safe. Less than a month after Wade was incarcerated, specifically on December 3rd, 2019, Wade's adoptive parents' house in Tennessee was mysteriously burned down, and Wade knew this was Eric and the organization attempting to kill them. That's when Wade decided he needed to retract his story because he realized the organization would still try to kill his loved ones. It took him some time to come out because he was hoping to not have a public defender and wanted to do it the right way with someone who would understand and be willing to stand up for him. Over time, he realized he would not get that and decided he needed to contact news to get his story out and retract his admission of guilt.
This is the first opportunity and truly the first chance that Wade has actually had to tell his story and to tell what actually happened. So, without further ado, we're going to move on next to actually hear Wade's story. Now, I ask that you please be patient. Again, we're going to try to make this quality as best as we physically can because we want you to hear everything about his story.